Hey guys, how's it going? Kripparrian here. Today we're going to talk about a very interesting topic that was first brought up on Reddit about a week ago, but I've had it on my mind and I basically want to put my own spin on it. It was essentially a post that probably belonged on Hearthstone Circle Jerk instead of the normal Hearthstone one, where someone just, threw out a few Hearthstone cards, part of the classic set, that probably should just not be there anymore because, well, they're a little bit too powerful. And this kind of stems a discussion from Blizzard nerfing a lot of the standard and the base cards in Hearthstone on the basis that they're a little bit too powerful and it's difficult for them to introduce new cards without constantly power creeping the game. Now, this is not really a problem if you're just a year, maybe two into the game, but Hearthstone is on its sixth year, and continuous power creep doesn't really work very well. And I think it is, if they're not going to restructure ranked mode, I think nerfing the base and standard set is okay, but nonetheless, we can kind of look into the future and see all the potential cards that they could nerf, and that's basically what we're going to talk about in this video, and see, just the ramifications of that. At least we can imagine that. So let's kick it off. There's a lot of cards actually from the base and standard set that are very strong actually. They constantly pop up in decks and they're constantly the center point of decks. So there's a lot of cards that Blizzard could be nerfing or could be Hall of Faming in the future. And this is, in my opinion, my picks of course, the full list. So here we go. Druid, we got Savage Roar. Savage Roar has plagued the, token / tempo / aggro Druid archetypes where it's a center point. It's what makes it work. The disadvantage to removing Savage Roar or increasing its mana cost, not too big of a one, I think. I think usually when Savage Roar is played, it's kind of like the finisher. So I think if Savage Roar was like 4 or 5 mana, it'd have a very similar impact. But if it was 4 or 5 mana, it would make it so Blizzard could introduce more cards like Savage Roar without having them being better. So Savage Roar actually is very likely to be nerfed in my opinion. Swipe has been a center point of basically every single Druid deck. It's face damage if you want it. It's board clear if you need it. It's wonderful with spell damage. It's just so good. And honestly, in terms of board clearing Druid spells, we haven't seen anything for a long time. And I think that makes Swipe actually a pretty good candidate to be nerfed once again. Now, the main issue with Druid as a whole is a lot of its cards have already been nerfed to a point where the overall base set of Druid is quite weak. But if they start introducing cards that are overall very powerful in the upcoming expansions, I think they actually will look at the base Druid cards once again. Power of the Wild makes my list. It's typically just better than your average +1/+1 effect. Power of the Wild has always just been the best one. There have been some coming up in standard, from time to time, but Power of the Wild has never, left the token archetype. It's just too good. So like a 1 mana nerf, pretty likely. Wrath. Doing 3 damage for 2 mana is actually quite premium. Yes, Wrath can't go face, but the advantage of cycling Wrath, I feel, is a gigantic one, especially when you consider the fact that Druid has a damage-based hero power and easily fits spell damage into its tools. Wrath might be a difficult one to nerf because, well, if you make it 3 mana cost, it sucks. Now, they might do that, but I think what's probably a little more likely is them reducing the damage possibly to 2 as a base. But, that's something we'll probably have to take a look at as the years unfold. Hunter has a lot of cards in the base set that are likely to be changed, nerfed, Hall of Famed, whatever. Animal Companion is one of the most played cards in the game right now. Even with Hunter not really at the very top of the meta, just Animal Companion fits into every single Hunter deck ever. Getting Hover for lethal, getting that high roll is just so powerful. Even if you get the worst Animal Companion, it's pretty good a lot of the time. So Animal Companion could easily be 4 mana and still be played. But, probably a hell of a lot less. Kill Command, again, I've noticed that over the years, doing a lot of damage for a small amount of mana has not been a type of card that Blizzard has produced. Most of those cards are from the classic set, and Kill Command is pretty high up on that list. Now, it's difficult to see Kill Command being played at all at 4 mana, but, you know, that's kind of the direction that I feel they're trying to move the game into. So that's possible, or they might just reduce the damage. Maybe if you have a beast, you do 4 damage instead of 3 rather than the 5. Scavenging Hyena, anytime there's an easy way to burst out some beasts, this little shit comes up, and oh my god, it is ridiculous. It's so difficult to deal with these hyenas, and honestly, I really hope this card does get nerfed, because I feel that cards that snowball out of control that early in the game makes the game overall too prone to opening hand RNG, which is probably my least favorite part about Hearthstone. Freezing Trap. Now, while overall the secret system is not particularly powerful, there are some secrets that carry the classes, and I feel like Freezing Trap, it just kind of takes over the secret slot. Anytime there's been a role for any kind of secrets, anytime there's a strong secret archetype, Freezing Trap is the very first secret that enters play. Even against metas where there's a whole lot of aggro, hunters have the tools to deal with small minions quite effectively, and they can make Freezing Trap, even in a bad meta, work out as one of the best secrets in the game. So yeah, Freezing Trap, I think it's quite likely to be nerfed at some point down the road. Probably they're not going to just destroy the card, because you can't increase the mana cost of a secret. They ought to be the same. And for hunters, that number is 2. They can't really change that. But what they can do is make it so when you replay the card, maybe instead of costing 2 more, maybe it only costs 1 more. I think that's a pretty fair nerf. Unleash the Hounds is one of the most nerfed cards in history, yet we might yet be on the verge of another Unleash the Hounds nerf. I think right now we're going to start seeing some aggro decks creeping up. We haven't really had a heavy aggro meta. Yes, we've had the odd and even, but it's difficult to call that the classic aggro deck in Hearthstone. But Unleash the Hounds is just the ultimate aggro counter. It's put Hunter above so many aggro decks in the past to a point where, yeah, I think they are going to at some point take a look at the card as well. Savannah Highmane basically makes any kind of 6-drop obsolete for hunters. It's difficult to see this card being bad even at 7 mana, but I would rather see a stat nerf. But with the way that Blizzard is doing things, most likely, if they take another look at Savannah Highmane, it'll end up being 7 mana. For Mage, it's a decent set, but I think it's quite deserved as well. Frostbolt, once again, Blizzard has moved away from very high damage, low mana cost spells, and Frostbolt on top of that freezes the target. That's kind of powerful. Now, I don't know how I would change Frostbolt. I think at 3 mana, it's a completely dead card, so maybe not 3 mana, but maybe 2 damage? I don't know. We'll see. Fireball. Yeah, 6 damage for 4 mana is just been really good at every single point throughout Hearthstone's history, all the way to today. Fireball's still seeing played a lot. It's just a crazy powerful card. I think if it did 5 damage, it'd be about as good. I think if it cost 5 mana, I think it'll be almost as good. Not quite, because it limits your overall burst potential in 1 turn. But, you know, maybe that's a good thing. And speaking of that, I think the next card that I think this is like the #1 card on the nerf list, by the way. Sorcerer's Apprentice. Yes, some people like Exodia decks and stuff, but man, this card just gets way too out of control. I think a few ways that you could nerf this card is 1, increasing its mana cost. That kind of nerfs the combo potential, particularly in the standard format. Not so much in the wild, because there's a lot of stuff that you can do for mana discounts through your hand, through whatever. Another elegant nerf that I was thinking for this card would be if they made it just your first spell of the turn costs 1 less. So you can just tempo out a Sorcerer Apprentice, and if you're playing kind of like a gradual win condition deck, like it wouldn't die from Tempo Mage, and that's kind of cool, but I don't know if Blizzard does cool nerfs. I think they mostly do fairly heavy-handed nerfs, at least when it comes to the base set in Hearthstone, so they can just make whatever they want in expansions and have those cards see play. Kirin Mage, another big one. This card just comes up #1 on the list. I think it's the reason why Mage secrets over the years have been pretty awful. It's because the secret tools in the core set are just ridiculous. So, yeah, I think maybe instead of, constantly making crappy secrets that cost 3 mana, maybe we just nerf the things that make secrets really broken, and Kripparrian Mage is probably near the top of that list. Kripparrian Mage at 4 mana in a secret-oriented deck would absolutely see play. So, yeah, why not? Blizzard is the final Mage card that I think probably could be adjusted. I say probably because it's kind of on the verge. It's just really good. But over the years, when Blizzard has introduced new board clears for Mage, they've generally gone alongside Blizzard. They haven't really competed for Blizzard. So this is a bit of a maybe, but I think if Blizzard cost 7 mana, it'd see roughly just as much play, so Blizzard might pull the trigger on that nonetheless. Paladin has some pretty interesting cards. Blessing of Might is near the top of my list for nerf cards because if you have keep in mind, like, Paladin has had no problem playing Zoo or Aggro for a long time now, and they just nerfed Cold Blood from 1 mana to 2. Cold Blood is 2 mana at best for attack. I mean, Blessing of Might, in a class that almost guarantees minions on the board anytime they want, 3 damage for 1 seems like a lot. Now, they could just change a card in a few different ways. Putting at 2 mana would certainly kill the card in most cases, but that's possible. That's certainly up their alley on how they are running things. True Silver Champion. I love this card. I'd hate to see it nerfed, but one thing that I've always wanted to see more in Paladin is healing. I think if they adjusted the damage of True Silver to like a 3 damage weapon, but increased the healing, that would be pretty sweet. That would be a pretty cool nerf. It would make it so the card would not see play in very many aggro decks or many mid-range decks anymore, but maybe it'll see a lot more play in the slower, more controlling Paladin decks, and I would love to see a change like that. Argent Protector, again, early game snowball card with not much of a risk because it's still really good in the late game as well. If you have no other minions, it's still an okay passable 2-drop. Just overall really, really good. I think if Argent Protector cost 3 mana, it'd still be about as good while seeing less play in aggro decks. And, that might be something that they'd want to do as, the expansions unfold, because it's difficult to really compete with any kind of card that does a similar effect when you have it on a 2-mana 2/2 body. Aldor Peacekeeper. Oh man. Now I know this card doesn't see a lot of play in some metas, particularly in ones where there's a lot of aggro decks, but in any meta where there are no aggro decks, Aldor Peacekeeper is really the champion of slaying them down. I think Aldor Peacekeeper would see just as much play at 4 mana as it does at 3, so I think it's certainly a worthy contender for the nerf bat. Priest has a few cards. Northshire Cleric just seems to make it in every single Priest deck. How are you ever going to get a better 1-drop than this? But, counter argument to that is Priest early game sucks anyways, and I can kind of buy that. But nonetheless, it's really difficult for Blizzard to create 1-drops that would see play over this card, and it's part of the base set, so nerf bat incoming probably. Power Word Shield is a pretty interesting card. But once again, it sees play in just about every single deck. It's just Priest right now is not the top of the meta, but you can't really weigh that in. You have to look at cards that just show up in every single deck that's difficult to improve on when they create a new expansion. I think Power Word Shield certainly fits the criteria for a change. I think if Power Word Shield costs 2 mana, it'd see almost as much play, so why not? Circle of Healing. Cards that cost 0 mana are certainly problematic in Hearthstone. Ones that actually have a meaningful effect, especially in Priest, where healing can be flipped towards damage, are actually pretty insane a lot of the time. I think Circle of Healing would still be an outstanding card at 1 mana. If the meta allows it, people will still play it, so keeping it at a lower power level would make way for weaker heals. We've seen a lot of weaker heal cards come into the game over the years, and they've really struggled to compete with Circle of Healing. In general, they either get outed for Circle of Healing or they're in conjunction with Circle of Healing. But if Circle of Healing cost 1, they'd still probably be in conjunction with those. So certainly a card they'll probably look at. For a rogue, top of the list for me is Sap. Sap is just completely insane. It allows rogues to totally blow out your opponents in the mid game and late game. I think if Sap cost 3 mana, it would be like 99% as good. Yet it might allow Blizzard to create cards that are a little bit competitive with a similar mechanic that would actually see play either instead of Sap in some expansions or alongside it. So very good chance this card will be looked at one day. And Preparation. This is at the very top of the problem cards in the whole standard and classic set, in my opinion. Preparation, if you look at the rogue spells, rogues have really good early game spells, but suddenly when you look at the mid-range and late game spells, they're all total garbage. And that's because of Preparation. How can rogue have the best early game spells, but the worst late game spells? It's because this card exists. Now, I don't know how you'd nerf Preparation. Probably the best way to do it is just to Hall of Fame the thing. It really sucks that, year after year, we get crappy late game rogue spell after crappy late game rogue spell. I think this is one of the most design limiting cards in the game, so watch out. Get your disenchant button ready. SI7, just extreme power level for an early game card. Now that's kind of the identity of Rogue, but it could be more refreshing to see that identity brought back to life each expansion or possibly every other expansion rather than having a card of this power level in the base set. So yeah, a stat nerf or a mana nerf I think is somewhat in order. Warlocks. Mortal Coil. This card is just really good. I think if they made it possibly 2 mana, it might kill the card, but at 1 mana, it's just like everywhere. So I don't know. Soulfire, already been nerfed from 0 to 1, but it's still in a lot of decks. Possibly with cards like these, if you up the mana cost, you might have to increase the damage as well, but they're in a tough spot. It's just like, how do you compete with that? How does Blizzard make an early game Warlock spell compete with that? I don't know. Now we have Hellfire. Hellfire is a totally insane card. You have to keep in mind, like, the cards that Warlock had for board clears, they've just been the same forever. And there's another one on the list, so I'll finish off that point pretty soon. But yeah, if Hellfire did less damage or cost more mana, it'd certainly still see play a decent bit. Flame Imp has still, to this day, been one of the most powerful 1-drops in the whole game. It carries Zoolock, and it makes Blizzard not really able to compete with a card like this, so they kind of have to have Zoolock on an okay, but they have to always be cautious in giving it more utility every time it's a new expansion. So like Warlock basically gets no good cards each expansion from, this kind of set existing. And lastly for Warlocks, I have Shadow Flame. Shadow Flame is crazy. I don't think I've ever seen a meta that didn't involve Warlocks with Shadow Flame. This card is just so busted. There's so many reasons why you'd want to kill off a minion. There's only so many reasons why you'd want to have an efficient board clear. There's a very big difference between clearing the board for like 6 or 7 mana than 4 mana. Because with 4 mana, you can instantly play something else alongside the board clear on the same turn. And those are the game swinging turns that you basically rely on to crush the soul of your opponent and take the win. So cards like that are ridiculously good. And I want to bring up kind of this point here where Warlocks have had such good board clears for so long that we had a card like Defile, which is like, one of the best cards in the history of Hearthstone, and some decks don't even run 2 of them. Because like the Warlock board clear set is so crazy. So we'll have to see, but I wouldn't bet on the whole board clear base set for Warlocks staying what it is in the months or years to come. Warriors only have 1 card in my mind, and that's Frothing Berserker. Yeah, Warriors are pretty dead right now, but the main reason why you don't see charge-giving effects, the main reason why you don't see stealth effects, the main reason why you don't really see any kind of combo effects anymore from Warrior is because Blizzard learned their lesson. Frothing Berserker is just absolutely insane when synergized with basically anything. So as a result, Warriors have received nothing. So yeah, that's why Warriors are not very good right now. I think a large part of the problem is this card existing in its current state. How would you nerf it? Would a mana cost nerf work? Probably, because a Frothing Berserker is just absolutely insane on curve anyway. If you take that away, then you're just running a combo deck, and that might be okay. For neutrals, I have a few picks as well. I have Acidic Swamp Ooze. We've had some weapon removal options come up even in the last few recent expansions, and they never compete with these. You have like a 3-mana ooze that gives you armor based on the attack of the weapon that you destroy, which you think is insane. No, it's just better to do it for less mana. Just doing it for less mana is basically always better. So, how are they ever going to introduce any kind of weapon removal mechanic when they have one on a 2-mana neutral card in the classic set? They're just not. So this card is certainly going to have to take a look at. Direwolf Alpha. This card has been the center point of Zoo, even decks, aggro, a whole lot of stuff, any kind of token deck. Direwolf Alpha is just absolutely insane at pushing the win condition on the board early on. You look at Direwolf Alpha and you look at the recently nerfed Flametongue Totem. Flametongue's a 3-drop now. I mean, yeah, it gives you one more attack, which is really big, but Direwolf Alpha is really good for 2 mana. Too good, I would say. Good enough that if Flametongue deserves to be 3, Direwolf Alpha probably deserves to be 3 mana as well. Wild Pyromancer has carried a lot of the board clear options, largely for Priest and Druid, and I feel that it's easier to nerf Wild Pyromancer than to constantly be limited to not pushing out powerful 0 mana cost and 1 mana cost spells. Wild Pyromancer has been kind of the core of that, and I think it's better to just, nerf the mana cost of Wild Pyromancer. Like 3 mana, people will still play, it just won't be as strong, and Blizzard will be able to create more spells that, are decent while costing only a little bit of mana. So, yeah. Acolyte of Pain, currently one of the most played cards from the neutral set, and that's just been the case forever. It's been a card that punishes aggro players, and I kind of like that. I think Acolyte of Pain would be completely dead at 4 mana, but if they made it like 4 or 5 mana and upped its health by 1 or 2, I think that would be a different story, because it would offer the same amount of value card draw based on that position in the game, but more so than that, it's a bigger risk tempo-wise if your opponent has some kind of instant removal. So I think that's something they can take a look at as well. And finally, my last card that is probably going to be nerfed at some point is Spellbreaker. Man, these silences are just so insane. Blizzard keeps creating more and more cool mechanics, and just about all of them get shut out by silence. And by playing a Spellbreaker, you're not really running much of a risk. It's going to hit just something, and it's a pretty strong body for its mana cost. Spellbreaker at 5 mana, I think, would see just as much play, but lower the power level to a point where maybe people won't choose to play it if they're playing a more aggressive deck. That's the list. Let me know if I've missed any. Let me know what you think the future might look at if they, really take a look at and change a great deal of these cards, which I think they probably will, and how that might work out for future expansions. Hope you guys enjoyed the talk, and we'll see you guys in the next one.